everyone. Thanks so much for coming. I can see it's a full house. Just want to remind people that if you do require an Auslan interpreter, you'll be able to see Dave signing up the front here. Please come forward. There are some seats available right up the front. I guess I'll begin just by acknowledging that we are meeting today on the stolen land of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Eastern Kulin Nation, and I want to pay my deepest respects to Wurundjeri elders past and present. To myself and fellow settlers who call Narm home, we must never forget the responsibilities associated with our existence in this place, which is enabled by the ongoing domicide or the destruction or attempted destruction of home or country and ways of dwelling of Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung and Bunurong peoples. Housing crisis has existed here since 1788, which is the formal advent of a process of illegitimate dispossession that continues well into the present. And this means any consideration of home, unhoming, housing crisis in this place has to first and foremost attend to unceded sovereignty and be understood from the perspective of First Nations peoples who have been subjected to forcible displacement and distance from their desired ways of relating to country since the start of colonisation. The Uruk Justice Commission's inquiry into land, sky and waters places specific emphasis on the relationship between colonisation and the rolling crisis of housing insecurity and homelessness faced by First Nations people in Victoria. And our discussion today, I feel, has to be grounded in an understanding that there can't really be attention to the question of housing justice without land justice, without attending to the harm and violence of unhoming that First Nations people have experienced and continue to experience. And I also wanted to make a quick mention and connect this question of dispossession and land justice to my wearing a keffiyeh tonight, as I can't help but think about how domicide and colonial unhoming here is also connected to what's being inflicted on Palestinians in Gaza at the moment. So attending to these spatial and temporal concerns when it does come to the matter of widespread and growing housing insecurity in Australia allows me to come to tonight's conversation in a different way, one that attends to the role of racism and colonial violence, of theft and dispossession in creating the very forms of property that we all critique in our analysis of wealth maldistribution and the conversion of housing from an essential social infrastructure to an asset. So I guess that sort of sets the scene for the kind of foundation that I'd like this conversation to proceed on. And maybe I should go ahead and introduce myself and the rest of the panel. So who am I in relation to these stolen lands and in relation to this event? I'm Priya Kunjan. I am a South Asian migrant settler. I'm a middle-class renter. I live in Preston. I moved house this week. And I am a researcher on the Australian Research Council-funded discovery project Precarious Dwelling Encounters with the Housing Crisis. So I'm very fortunate to be working alongside Professor Libby Porter and Dr. David Kelly at RMIT Centre for Urban Research. And our current research focus is policy encounters that produce dwelling precarity. And I'm also a broadcaster on 3CR Community Radio. And I am joined here by our fantastic panel today. First of all, Alan Kollers, a veteran financial journalist at the ABC, and who last year published the thought-provoking quarterly essay, The Great Divide, Australia's Housing Mess and How to Fix It. I'm also joined by Jim Malo, property and housing reporter with The Age, who has significant experience covering housing insecurity and the domestic housing market. And finally, by Jordan Vandenberg, or Purple Pingers, as some of you may know him, who provides some incredibly important public education and entertainment via his reviews of and visits to the worst rentals that Australia has to offer. So thank you, everyone. And could we just give the panel a bit of a round of applause? So some quick housekeeping notes. Again, for people who've just joined us, there is Auslan interpretation up the front. If you do need an interpreter, please come forward. There are some seats available. And there are ushers around the back of the room if you need bathrooms or need to leave the room. I believe this event's being recorded, and the Q&A will be conducted via Slido. So you just have to scan the QR code, and your questions will come up here. So you can ask them at any time during the event, and I might go to the Slido questions during the conversation. But yeah, we'll be taking that via this rather than a live mic. So I guess in the lead up to this event, I was asked whether I might be interested in interviewing some people about their experiences of housing insecurity in this place. And I initially was kind of wondering how I would do this, because there's always a risk of, producing poverty porn or trauma porn when you're talking to people about their lived experiences of housing insecurity. And I really want to make sure that I'm trying to center people's agency and the way that they create home anyway, despite the circumstances that they're experiencing. And I got to interview two NARM renters, Laura and Francesca, and these interviews are both published on the Wheeler Center's website. And both of those conversations gave me the opportunity to deeply and carefully pay attention to what it means to attempt to carve out home places at this time in this city. So I hope that if you haven't already had the chance to read the interviews, you will after tonight's event. Speaking with Laura gave me an incredible insight into something that I hadn't really engaged with before myself, which is Laura's experience as being a primary guardian for a young person who lives in community immigration detention, and what it means to navigate the rental market as a person who's a carer for a young person who has very specific restrictions and surveillance around where they can and can't be at all times, and what it means to try and navigate a sense of home and housing security through that. And I know that at a basic level, many of us share an intuitive understanding about just how significant housing is to our being in the world. Housing researchers speak of the role of home in providing individuals with this sense of ontological security, a term that really strongly resonated with Laura's reflections on the constant process of negotiating what it means to make home for a young person in her care. But obviously what we understand housing to mean is at pretty severe odds with the way that we treat housing in Australia, which is as a commodity and a site of wealth accumulation. So the financialization of housing is going to be a big feature of this conversation, and that's the treatment of housing as a commodity. And that's also fundamentally linked in this country to the promotion of asset-based welfare. The rich get richer, the poor get the picture. And in that, Francesca's incisive framing of the relationships between housing, debility, and colonialism, and the way that poor quality housing can be disabling and constant dislocation can be disabling as well, provided me with a lot to think about in the lead up to this event. So that's all my scene setting. I'm going to try and be a bit more quiet now, apart from asking questions. But I want to turn to the panel and start off with what drew you to the question of housing. I know all three of you spent considerable time and effort engaging with the issue of housing stress in Australia from your respective positions. So yeah, Alan, I thought maybe we could start with you and then just go around. What brought you to the question of housing? Why is it so compelling to you?
Well, as a financial journalist, I cover lots of financial issues, both on TV and in writing, and one of them has been housing, and I kind of think it's a very important one. I started writing a few columns about how I thought housing was changing Australia in the way that it was, and changing Australia for the worse, the way that housing had become unaffordable. So I thought that it was changing society, and I wrote that a few times, and then the editor of Quarterly Essay contacted me and asked me if I'd like to write a quarterly essay about it, and I thought, yeah, okay, that sounds a good idea. And then I spent 6 months delving into it more deeply than I have delved into anything, I guess, and found that experience really rewarding and interesting. And here we are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think something that's so interesting in the question of housing as well is there's so much of yourself that goes into that, because it really comes back to the fact that we all engage with the housing system in some way or another. And I know there's a lot of personal reflection on your own housing journey and of your families in there. Jim?
I would say that housing wasn't something that I necessarily was drawn to or chose, but it chose me. And I worked with Domain for, I think, about 4 years-ish. Between 2016 and 2020. And it wasn't until I was choosing to come back to the age that I feel like I was really choosing to write about housing. I recognised quite a lot of injustice in the housing space when I was in that early period working for Domain. And I think that as I saw the housing crisis starting to pick up and become more serious, it made me realise that it was a really good opportunity for me to do something that I think journalism is really, what is journalism to me, and that is help people and help be a voice for people who, are suffering through the housing crisis. And I think this most recent rental crisis in particular is something that has really drawn my attention to housing and I guess the ill effects the commodification of housing has had in our society.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the position of being a property reporter, I can imagine, is a bit of an interesting one because you're kind of straddling that, economic analysis and engagement with people that, on one side are involved in almost driving, these concerns. And on the other hand, I know you do these, incredibly sensitive and nuanced deep dives into the experiences of renters and how they navigate things like VCAT cases. Now, Jordy, I know you come to this from a little bit of a different position, so can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I guess what drew me to housing is I am, or at least used to be, a young person, and you can see just based on all the charts.
You're still young.
Thank you, mate. We got the short end of the stick. That's not to say it doesn't affect not young people, but we've got the short end of the stick, and that's the fact of the matter at the moment. Also, I hate real estate agents.
Yeah, it's been
Thank you.
For people that aren't familiar with Jordan's social media presence, please, is the site Shit Rentals?
Yeah.
Shitrentals.com?
.org.
Shitrentals.org. Check it out. And this, if there's not going to be a properly managed register of badly behaved real estate agents, then, there will be a people's register, as Jordan has proved. So I was hoping that we could talk a little bit about, we've used the term housing crisis a couple of times, about what it means to use that term crisis, and how might our perceptions of this sort of exceptional nature of the present moment change if we situate this issue in a longer history of housing markets, both here and internationally. And Alan, you were mentioning some research and and a piece that you worked on very recently about this. I thought maybe we could start with you in terms of what it looks like, what it means to unpack the question of the term crisis.
Only that we're now in a situation where the average family can't afford the average house, which I think is a moment. I did some sums, figured out that, a couple on average weekly earnings with 2 kids who put the kids in childcare and buy the median priced house would end up with $500 a week after their mortgage repayments and childcare costs to pay for everything else: food, clothes, utilities and medical. So that's not viable anymore. And that's occurred because for the past 25 years, house prices in general have increased at twice the rate of incomes. So instead of being 3 to 4 times the average income, the median house price of Australia is now 8 times the average income. And that's a big change over 25 years. And it started happening in the year 2000.
Which is definitely much longer than that term crisis would lead us to, conjure up in our minds.
We've arrived at a crisis because of that rapid, the fact that house prices have increased at twice the rate of incomes over the past 25 years has meant that we've gradually got there, and now we've arrived at what I think can rightly be called a crisis, because housing has become unaffordable. You can't buy a house anymore. And the same thing has happened on the rental side for kind of different reasons, but similar. So both renting and buying has become unaffordable unless you've got wealthy parents who can help you.
Yeah, definitely. I guess for these ones, I'm not planning to go in a particular order, so either of you can jump in.
Yeah, sure. I feel like housing has been in crisis for a long time. As soon as I started working for Domain in 2016, it felt like the housing market was already starting to lurch from one crisis to the next. This is more vibes-based than numbers-based, like Alan sort of thinks. But, for me, at the time, around 2017, when I moved to Melbourne, 2018, around 2017, 2018, we were already facing a situation where people, the issue wasn't necessarily as difficult and pointy as it is now, but there was a lot of consternation about first home buyers being unable to buy at auction or being outbid at the last minute by investors who were, looking to make a mozza on speculating on property. Renting was already pretty terrible. It's nowhere near as it was nowhere. Well, it depends who you are, really. I think for the poorest Australians, renting was already quite bad. The vacancy rates were not as bad as they are now, but they still were below a level that is considered healthy for rental markets. I worked on stories where I would talk to people before any of this was starting to happen. Renters would tell me that they were choosing to go, and these are people on welfare, choosing to go between eating or buying medication that they needed to survive. These stories were not rare. They have been happening for a long time, and now the crisis has expanded to a point where it is the average family, the median family, the middle-class people who are struggling more to afford houses. It's not to say people can't afford houses. People can. I know people who have managed to buy houses off their own backs without help from their families. But it takes a lot of work and a lot of hard work and dedication. And it's beyond the effort that I think should be considered reasonable to have a roof over your head in a place where you need to live for whether it's your job, your communities, whatever it is. It has come to a level now where even comfortable people like myself will not be able to buy houses, and I think that is probably why this is feeling like a more critical moment of crisis. But for lots of people in Australia, the crisis has been here for at least a decade.
Yeah, I mean. Also, as somebody who has a well-paying job, I'm a full-time academic researcher. In the recent house move that my partner and I just went through when we were looking for properties, we were on realestate.com.au, and there's always that little calculator that on the side when you're looking at rentals, it says, have you considered buying instead? And every time I'm like, God, no. Like, I am not realistically we're not, dual income, no kids, but we're not realistically going to be able to afford a mortgage in the place that we want to live. And, wanting to live there, part of that reason is we're offsetting costs in terms of, riding our bikes everywhere. There's so many different considerations that come up.
Just on that as well, the dual income, no kids thing, we did a story recently at The Age where we looked at how much money you would need to chip in, get the bank of mum and dad to chip in to actually be able to buy a property. I live in Brunswick East. If I wanted to buy a house there, I would need to ask my parents for something like $400,000 or more. It's absurd.
Yes. I know my family's in the audience, and I am just kindly asking you for at least $100,000 to put down there.
You might need more depending on where you live.
Oh, no, I'm definitely going to need more than that. So, Jordy, I'm also interested in hearing the rental side of this, but I'm sure you've also got views on the home ownership side around this question of crisis. I guess something that both you and I have in common is that we spend a lot of time talking to people that are renting and really going, taking a deep dive into people's experiences of what it's like to live in a crumbling home. So when we talk about crisis from the perspective of renters, can you tell us a little bit about what that's looked like?
Yeah. So depending on who you ask, this is not new, nor is it relatively new, or even just a couple of decades old. To certain members of our society, this has been going on as long as they can remember. But quite frankly, and no disrespect to Channel 9 or the ABC, but not those viewers. And I think now that this is starting to affect wealthy people, it's starting to affect the rich, now we can call it a crisis. And I don't think that's the right way to look at housing. This has happened since we've commodified it, which is not the commodification of human rights is not a new thing. But yeah, now it affects the wealthy. Now it's a crisis. It's my opinion.
Yeah, and I mean, when you're talking about the commodification of human rights there.
Sorry.
Yeah. Well, when you're talking about the commodification of human rights there, it is just, striking to note that there is a Charter of Rights in Victoria, and that doesn't include the right to housing, which then, throws up all of these issues around needing to innovate particular minimum rental standards when perhaps these things could be covered in a right to housing that is, more broadly stated. Does anybody would you like to respond?
Yeah, please do.
To that point, or
Let's have a chat.
shall I?
I mean, the reason I'm saying it's a crisis now is because it's not become the problem for wealthy people, it's become a problem for ordinary people. And we've always had poor people, and
it's
poor
always
people,
affected them.
And poor people have always been in a crisis, of course. And I'm not trying to
I wasn't saying
diminish
that. I was saying
the
this
importance
is the
of that. I'm
immediate
just saying that
perspective.
the reason we're talking about it as a crisis now is because it's affecting ordinary, average people.
Yeah, and that's our definition of it.
Not wealthy people, is what I'm saying.
Relative, it's all like you're going to be a wealthy person compared to someone who's never been. We all are.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
It's
It's
hitting
just a
people
perspective.
at the median income.
That's exactly what I'm referring
Yeah.
to. Like we've had, people at the lower end of the wealth spectrum that have always experienced this. It was never a crisis when it affected them, and now it affects the average person. Now it's a crisis.
Even people who are sort of towards the middle of, the median or the average wage have recently struggled as well to get into housing. Like the rise of share housing is something that, and into people's 30s or even longer in some cases, is something that has been happening for quite a while now as well. And this is one of those things that if you have been looking at housing for a long time, like I have, it sort of feels a little bit like, oh, this is new now. But it does feel like we are retreading similar things, but with a different window dressing at the moment. But I do agree that it has reached a much more untenable point to the point where it's becoming a massive drag in our society now.
Yeah, I mean, something that comes up a lot in the research that I'm doing is just the constant compromises that people are having to make to stay housed. And those are compromises that people, including people who are at that median income bracket, are making, that even if it is not necessarily the choice between buying your medication or buying food for the week, it still has an impact on the way that people are able to see themselves in the world. And so, there are definitely levels of privilege to talk about there. But then I think it does, have this deeper effect, this question of ontological security that I mentioned at the beginning, which a lot of people are feeling come into question as this hits higher and higher income brackets. Now, I wanted to turn to something which I think has become a bit of a buzzword in political conversations and in a lot of media reporting around housing as well. And this is about the issue of supply. There's also been a lot of lobbying and public advocacy around the need for more housing supply, and the federal and Victorian state governments have been very responsive in talking in those terms. I do have some questions about the nature of the supply issue. And it really makes it seem like housing crisis in Australia will be solved if we just build more homes, and that is a straightforward thing that we can just do, preferably off budget. So I'd be keen to get your perspectives on the way that housing supply is treated and how it relates to questions of availability and affordability. I think, Jordy, I'll go to you first because you've been also having some interesting conversations around squatting too. Yeah.
Yeah. I think and I think always when we have these conversations, because there's a YIMBY and NIMBY movement, you've got to preface, by the way, I'm a YIMBY or I'm a NIMBY. I'm a YIMBY, just so we're aware. But I think that we have, when we talk about this kind of stuff, we don't consider things like existing homes and things like, the majority of short stay accommodation were previously long-term rentals, and just how it's kind of changed. And if we look at, developers' behaviours when they create a development, they drip feed those properties onto the market to not affect their, not flood the market with supply to increase their profits. We also have quite a few homes in Australia that are vacant. And by vacant, I don't mean, you've gone down to the shops for a minute. I mean abandoned, which are really we have homes without people while we have people without homes at the moment. And I think that's really wrong. I don't think that's, particularly billions of homes, but it's a significant number. And we all see them kind of every day. So I think there's, we do need to build homes. We do need to increase the supply of housing. But if we just did that, that's not going to solve our problem, because we've done that a few times and we're back here. This is a bit of a cycle. However, I also think, we need to really focus on non-market actors like public housing. We've just kind of neglected that for a hot minute, and I think we should come back to that.
Alan, I might go to you because you've been crunching some of these numbers as well.
Oh, well, so the reason we keep talking about supply is because it's become, obviously housing is a political issue. It's discussed politically. The solutions are political. But politicians are much better at doing more of things than doing less of things, if you know what I mean. So, so politicians much prefer to do that, to increase something, because reducing demand requires the reduction of something. It requires taking something away from people. So in 2016, the Labor Party had its policy of confining negative gearing to new houses only, and halving the capital gains tax discount from 50 to 25%. And they almost won that election, and then they lost again. They had the same policy in 2019 and they lost it again. So the whole issue of taxation has become toxic, and understandably really, because putting up taxes is a difficult political thing to do. And so supply is easy. My problem with the whole argument about supply is that it's not based on any kind of calculation, if you like. I mean, my view is housing is an essential thing. It's regarded as a human right. The government, the United Nations Convention of Human Rights describes housing as a right. So it's essential. Energy is also essential, but we have this thing called the Australian Energy Market Operator, and their job is to constantly examine the demand and supply of energy. And this week they put out their latest quarterly discussion report on the demand-supply situation with energy, and they kind of talk about specifically what's required. And their job is to ensure that there's a correct supply of energy for demand. So the discussion about supply of housing is divorced from what demand is. There's kind of, the Victorian government says we're going to build 2 million houses, and the federal government says we're going to build 1.2 million houses over 5 years, or we're going to try to see that they're not going to actually build them, of course. Governments don't build houses, So they say that we're going to try to ensure that 1.2 million houses are going to be built over 5 years, and that's going to be their solution. New South Wales government has its own, I can't remember what their number is, but it's a number of houses that they want to see get built. None of that has anything to do with demand. You know, like it's just, they just announce a number of houses that may or may not get built. So really, there needs, in my view, needs to be some kind of method. Some body needs to examine constantly demand and supply, and to try and have the job of balancing them to make sure, because in order for housing to become more affordable, we need to have a long period of an oversupply of housing. It isn't going to be enough to match demand with supply. We have to have, for quite a long time, like 10 years or more, an oversupply of housing. You know, and that isn't a number of houses, that is versus demand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, it really hammers home how the financialization of housing has turned housing into such an abstract thing in policy language that it becomes this, you know, you can put out a set of shiny new targets and you don't have to worry about how they're delivered as long as your target looks good. And so it becomes this political football that, you know, different parties can, you know, build targets into their policy platforms and not necessarily have to worry about how they're going to be met. Jim?
They might have to worry about it in 5 years when they don't meet any of them. But like, you know, at this point, I would just say that like the supply targets, which I think Alan has rightly identified, just seem plucked out of thin air. And that's potentially just because they are really a smokescreen. The talk of like housing supply is often trotted out when, you know, like talking about, you know, the awful conditions that tenants live in, or the, you know, the difficulty that the average family has in getting a house, and like trotted out by governments as their preferred solution. But in my view, that's because the governments don't really know what to do about making housing affordable. It's something that they can say that they're doing, but you know, like because it's so like pie in the sky and like intangible, it's very hard to call them on this, you know, that they're using a smokescreen. And I think it's and I think the reason why supply has become such a sort of like a fraught topic in the housing debate is because of what I mentioned earlier, using it as a solution for, say, the current rental crisis. It's not a short-term solution, and anyone who says, well, we're building more houses will acknowledge that it's going to take a long time for that to actually have an effect. And you can see this in a lot of modelling, particularly some modelling that I'm partial to is the RBA's modelling on, you know, the effect of, say, like interest rates on the amount of supply of housing. Like the higher interest rates go, it will make housing cheaper, but over the long term, it will make it more expensive over a long time as it gets harder and harder to build, right? So, you know, you can sort of see how these effects sort of, I guess, all these things sort of like work with each other when you look at some economic modelling, right? But I do think that, what was I saying? Sorry, it's embarrassing. Oh, shit.
What do you think?
Yeah.
Do not
Jump in, Priya.
Go ahead.
I found it. So one thing I do think, though, is something else that Alan mentioned, and we're talking about negative gearing and you know, the effect that would have in the housing market. Modelling was done that showed that it wouldn't actually cause house prices to fall. They would just grow less than they would have if negative gearing continued to exist. And I think in Victoria right now, we're sort of witnessing a moment that is similar to what it would look like if negative gearing was abolished Australia-wide, by making it more expensive for landlords to do business, by expanding the land tax, so more landlords who previously weren't covered by land tax now have to pay land tax, and by also raising the bar to have a rental and therefore the cost associated with maintaining that rental. The Victorian government has sort of created a situation where there is more stock coming onto the market in Victoria than there is in other states around the country. prices in Melbourne have been stagnant or, growing slowly for a while now. And it's giving people a chance to catch up. First home buyers can actually buy properties. They're ex-rentals, so, they would have been living in them anyway. So the poorer quality doesn't bother them as much. And I think this is an excellent example of, and I think that's an excellent example of, like what it could look like. Stagnant prices for a long time will cause a lot of consternation from like the owner class and obviously landlords, because by removing negative gearing, you would be pushing them out of the housing market nationwide. But it's a much softer landing than the housing markets could have otherwise, particularly if it was flooded with stock by the government building housing, which of course they would never do, but would actually be a meaningful way to reduce the cost of housing, rather than depending on these figures that everyone is telling governments now that aren't actually possible.
I wanted to pick up on a couple of things and fold in a few questions from the audience into one big, beautiful question. So there have been a couple of points raised about the political will to change, and this, I think, can also be because some people have mentioned in the same question, some people have disaggregated them, but there are questions about multiple property ownership and its contribution to housing price inflation. But then also, alongside that, I thought maybe we can talk about a question that's come up about how politicians can make changes to these things in a meaningful way and can be held to commit to those changes when they own multiple investment properties themselves. Would anybody like to jump in?
Well, clearly, a lot of politicians are conflicted, yeah. I mean, I'm not quite sure what you do about that. What do? We tell them they can't own investment properties? I don't think we can do that. Probably not.
If there was a nationwide
They'd have to say that. They'd have to vote on that.
Yeah, look, I think it's just, there you go. It's just...
It's
not
difficult.
much you can do about it, I think.
I think one of the things I've seen at least talked about, it didn't really go anywhere, but in Queensland, the Greens there asked landlord MPs to excuse themselves from voting on legislation that affected, investment properties. That's the sort of thing that people, that
The chamber would be empty.
Yeah, exactly. But obviously it's more of a political stunt. But there at least there is some effort going into acknowledging that it is a conflict of interest, and it's hard to get someone to vote against their own interests. But
Look, I do think that there's a bit of a trap with a lot of this discussion. Not among us, but in general, that to get distracted by trivialities, things that seem like a big deal or annoy you, and politicians owning investment properties and voting on policies, that's annoying, but it's not the main game. It's there, but the main game is the demand and supply of housing. We need more housing versus demand. And we need lots more housing.
I think part of the reason why people focus on these things over supply and demand, though, is because supply and demand is largely it's economics, sure, but it's mostly talked about in neoliberal economics, and neoliberal economics got us into this mess that we're in today, don't you think?
I'm not talking about neoliberal or conservative or liberal or whatever. I'm just talking about we don't have enough houses for demand for housing, totally. Which is driving up prices.
Yeah,
and we don't have enough rental properties, which is why we've got such a low vacancy rate.
The construction industry is not responding to price signals.
That's right. So the construction. So what I'm saying is that there are multiple causes and solutions. Like there's tons of things that are the problem, not just one. I mean, it's a mistake, I think, to single one thing out, to say it's all about negative gearing, or it's all about immigration, or it's all about this. I mean, it's not about one thing.
Yeah, it's a multifaceted issue, but they all contribute to each other, and I feel like landlords being in Parliament writing rules and in some cases policy on what landlords can do with properties, that definitely plays into it. It's definitely part of the problem.
I don't disagree. I think that's right.
The question was about that, wasn't it, as well?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the question was about, and I'm quite interested in this as well. Is I suppose it really gets to how do vested interests shape the way that policymaking occurs? Because on the one hand, I totally understand that we can get bogged down in the weeds of trying to get the receipts on every single politician. But on the other hand, there is, a cultural acceptance that that politicians should be able to hold very large property portfolios, and this idea that that doesn't somehow have a relationship to how they, treat housing as a as a social good versus a commodity.
Yeah, but the bigger problem is that most voters own a house, and they want prices to go up.
Yes, I do agree.
That's the problem is that
not for long though.
But it's not just. Well,
True.
Well, maybe, but really, the powerful people in Australia, not just politicians, but bankers, real estate agents, all sorts of powerful people own property and want the price to rise.
And also, as well as just the average person's financial well-being being tied to the value of their home.
Exactly.
There's also, major industries that are tied to, that are only viable if house prices continue to go up, which, an economy of constant growth is not really sustainable on a finite planet. So it's I think we should be looking past market solutions for problems that have been created by a market, and that's just my perspective.
I'd like to come to that.
There you are.
Yes,
Struck a chord there.
I'd like
found
to.
my soundbite.
Yeah, I'd like to focus on that as well, because there have been a couple of questions about public housing and about non-market housing solutions, and I might go to Jordy first, because you brought up public housing in an earlier response. Can you talk a bit about what you sort of envision in terms of more of a focus on public housing, or utilizing the stock that we have, or increasing public housing stock?
Yeah, I just really think we need to do it. Like if you look today, if the Prime Minister of Australia was born today, I doubt he would be the Prime Minister of Australia. Like he'd be on a 15-year waiting list to get into public housing.
I reckon he'd love 1-4 though.
Yeah, I don't know how it's going to work. I don't know. I don't think we'll have any more Prime Ministers of Australia that are from public housing. Like, I don't think it's going to work. It's such an incredible safety net for so many people, and it also reduces the cost of housing by being a non-market actor to housing. If people can access housing that's not at the market price, and the market price is the problem, that's going to make that price come down. It's also a human right. So if you can't afford to access a house, whether that's through buying one or renting one, that doesn't mean you should be precluded from ever accessing a house. Like, that's not fair. So I think it's a logical, it's hard to argue against public housing unless you intentionally want to increase the price of housing, in which case, let's not build public housing.
Yeah, I think public housing is something that is a specific focus of the research that I'm doing at the moment. And it has been quite interesting seeing the public discussion happening about the Victorian government's statement, I think Victoria's housing statement that came out in September last year, which announced the plan to retire and redevelop the 44 public housing high-rise towers across Melbourne. I'm not even going to go into how poorly that was delivered, but it does. The conversation constantly gets away from this idea that everybody should be able to be housed in a decent, affordable, well-located property, and comes back to the idea that these places aren't fit for purpose. And something that keeps, pinging in the back of my mind is, well, a lot of private rentals are absolutely uninhabitable.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah, that's a really good point. I went to a rental doing some groundwork, a rental inspection, doing some groundwork for a story. And I specifically chose it because I wanted to find one that would have lots of tenants that were there. And the house smelled of damp as I walked into it. There was a room that was previously probably the back of the house that had like a sort of like a hallway built onto the side that probably wasn't council approved, that, you know, sort of like shut this one room of the house like entirely indoors, you know, like so it had very little natural light coming in whatsoever. The house itself was like grotty and falling to pieces, and the smell of mold was very present. And that was a 3-bedroom house in Brunswick, and they were asking $650 a week.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, like it's disgusting, and more broadly on public housing not being you know, fit for habitation. That's not a new problem, and the reason that it's not is because the government has not maintained it. I've known about that being an issue since I've been doing property journalism for quite a long time. It's very difficult to write about, but it's there, and it's something that has just not been addressed. And ever since I've been writing about property, the solution I've been told from people in the not-for-profit housing space is build more public housing, or build more, at least social housing, which is still tied to market values, so it isn't necessarily a safe place for poor people to live either. So
Yeah.
Definitely. Like that's what I'm hearing as well, and talking to people in public housing. We have good quality public housing. We have really good quality public housing. If the government neglects it, that's just what's going to happen. Like that is the fact of the matter. Also, I just realised what you said before earlier. That's not what I was saying. I was saying because people won't be able to access public housing, that public housing will disappear. So, yeah, which is not what we want. But, yeah.
Alan, I'd be keen to hear your thoughts on non-market housing options.
All the governments, you know, federal government and state governments, I think, sign up to the idea that housing is a human right, and I don't think that has any meaning unless they actually provide housing for people. So there was a white paper on homelessness in 2009 by the federal government called The Road Home, and the aim of the white paper, which was like all white papers, sets out policy on a particular topic. So this one was designed to set out the policy on homelessness, and the plan was that what the stated policy was that it would they would reduce homelessness in Australia by half by the year 2020 from 2009. So in 2009 there were 100,000 homeless people in Australia, and now there are, I think, 120,000. So not only was it kind of a failure, homelessness has increased. So I think the whole thing about homelessness is kind of meaningless unless the government says we are going to make sure everyone's got a home, we've got a place to live. That's what needs to happen. And then some countries do that. Austria does it, Finland does it. I mean, and those places are cold, so people die if they're out. But still, it is possible to do it.
We almost did it in Melbourne. Yeah.
Yeah, we did it in 2020.
Yeah.
They ended homelessness in Melbourne overnight by putting homeless people in hotels to save them from.
Oh,
COVID.
I see. Yeah, that's right.
But it ended for a very brief
in
period.
COVID. Yeah,
It's a policy choice.
It is. You're right.
It is.
Actually, poverty is a policy choice as well. I mean, anyway. Actually, I won't.
Yeah, no, but it is like, you know, it's in very, very recent memory, we've been able to address these things at least for a short period of time, but and then we, you know, there's a bit of a hoo-ha and we revert back to the status quo.
They want the hotels back.
Exactly, they want the hotels back.
And also, I
yeah.
didn't mean to interrupt. But also, like, just before we move off homelessness, like one thing that is very present in my mind, particularly when looking at graphs of how much rents have gone up over the recent period, is that homelessness is tied to rents going up. So as soon as rents go up, you can be fairly certain that homelessness will also rise, and it's something that is, I think, very appreciated. That it's not just a pain for middle class people, but it also can mean death for the poorer people among us.
Yeah, and I think so much of homelessness is very poorly understood by a lot of the general public. There is an assumption that homelessness always looks like sleeping rough, and it doesn't necessarily. There are so many people that are couch surfing constantly, that are couch surfing for years, that are, moving back in with their families, that are moving in with relatives that live in public housing and putting, everyone's tenure is then at risk by virtue of having to, try and collectively figure out a way to make sure that somebody is not sleeping rough. So I think a lot of this, it becomes really invisible, and there's such a massive disconnect between, the delivery of actual basic housing support and the rhetoric of, trying to adopt, for example, a housing first approach to homelessness, because that sort of stuff happens on paper, and yet people are still dying on the streets every day.
Yeah, and I mean, go up to a person on the street and say, oh, good news, they're fixing housing affordability. They're building houses. You may be able to get one in 5 to 10 years if you can afford it. It's obscene. People are dying.
Yeah, and I guess I wanted to come to a question that, and this is again folding a couple of things in, so I hope that some people's questions are getting answered, but comes to the fact that you're all public communicators about, about the issue of housing insecurity in one way or another. How do you deal with people who express skepticism about the severity or scale of housing stress?
I don't know. I'll punch him in the face, I suppose.
That's a great answer. No more answers. This panel's over.
I love it. I think it's a real problem because we have a real cognitive dissonance at the moment. Because if you bought a house in the 1970s or the 1980s or the 1990s for like $20 and a high five, and renting was you were a temporarily embarrassed homeowner for a bit. That was your reality, and that was the reality of our political class and landlords at the moment. So if that's your reality, and the reality of someone born a bit later is the exact opposite of that, like I'm going to be renting for my entire life, if that's your reality, then how do you communicate to that person? That's the crux of cognitive dissonance, and that is what I'm trying to achieve with shitrentals.org, is to, how many examples of this really sucks do we have to have before we admit that we've got a problem? I could go to every house, and we can do that. Is that what it's going to take for us to acknowledge that there's something wrong here?
Well, thinking back to that question of homelessness, I think it's been amply proved how much sleeping rough sucks and reduces your lifespan, and basically just makes you susceptible to all different kinds of violence and of oppression. And we've known this for as long as housing has been commodified. And yet this revelatory theory of change seems to not necessarily be getting us as far as we'd want it to. But then on the other side, there really is the importance of amplifying these stories.
Yeah, I probably maybe on the panel am the person who most routinely has to either hear from people or talk to people who may want to downplay the seriousness of the housing crisis. When I am emailed by landlords, how do I deal with that? I ignore them. But when I'm talking to public figures or people who may want to downplay the seriousness of it, I always try to at least make sure that they at least acknowledge or are aware of the reality of the behind the numbers, right? I want them to know, and for me, it's it's not a difficult test to pass, but for me to think that these people are credible people to speak to, they must at least acknowledge the human suffering and the human scale of the issue. If someone were to say to me that there wasn't an issue, or the issue is not as serious as people maybe make it out to be, particularly when I know a lot of the numbers and I hear a lot of the testimonies, for me that just shows that they either have some ulterior motive, or they are just not a reliable person to speak to.
Very good.
I don't really want to punch him in the face.
I mean, you might a little bit.
That was a joke.
We should get that on one of his shirts. I reckon.
Comedy,
Yeah, I think
comedy,
so.
not an actionable threat. Comedy. We're coming quite close to 7:30, so I'm just going to go to a couple more questions. One of them is about higher taxes on landlords and the question about whether that drives up rents. What are your thoughts on state and local governments as well using land taxes to offset the effects of negative gearing? Anybody wants to?
Yeah, I'll take that. So I wrote a story about this earlier in the rental crisis. The landlords will always charge as much as the market will allow them to. They may want to claw back increased prices, increased costs of running their business from tenants. But if the market will not bear the rent that they are looking to get, they won't get it. It is true that like rising costs will make someone want to try to get more back, but it's just not how the rental market works.
There's so I have a bit of a controversial opinion on land tax, but like when you buy a house, whether you're a landlord or a homeowner, like a single home owner occupier kind of thing, you take away society's access to that land, and then you privatize that land, and that the value of that land will increase over time through you can do nothing, you can literally let it sit there and rot. And yeah, the value of your house or your land is going to increase through contributions to the area around it that are made not by you, whether that's the government, building a nice new road, someone doing a nice painting, making a statue, or like a bunch of people opening shops nearby. The value of your land's going to increase and you've done nothing, and you have to pay a one-off stamp duty that 1% of the property's value or 10% of the property's value from like 20, 30 years ago. That's not fair. We need to re-socialise the value. Like if you did nothing to contribute to the increase in value of your property, everyone else did, then everyone else deserves a chunk of the increase of your property's value. And that's why we should move to, taxing everything effectively. We have a really ineffective tax policy.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
What do you reckon?
No, well, look, no, it's obviously we have land tax on properties that we don't live in, and we don't have land tax on properties we do live in, and I don't think that's going to change.
I think economists have been pushing for this for a while, and I think some of the economists who do have the ear of government at the moment potentially would be advocating for a broad-based land tax and the abolishment of stamp duty. It is fairly widely acknowledged as a that's just me thinking about behind the scenes. It may not be true. I don't really know, but it is acknowledged as a bit of a brake on productivity to and also a brake on people more effectively utilising the housing that we have by sort of discouraging people. Stamp duty, that is, discourages people from actually moving because it's such an onerous cost. And moving to a broad-based land tax, I think, would be a much more effective way of taxing housing, which would encourage people to move and free up big houses that they don't need anymore, and also would make it more affordable to transact as well.
You're right. Economists all think that. That's true.
All right. On that note, on that beautiful moment of consensus between all economists, 9 out of 10 economists, I have a final question just to end on, because we're at 7:30. But if all of you could maybe leave us with something practical that people can do, somebody is asked about as members of the public to help apply pressure to fix the housing crisis. So I'm just going to go in order this way. Jordy, you want to start?
Can I go last? You got to think about that.
You have to think. You looked so keen. You were making eye contact. I thought
I
that.
got just a lot of thoughts.
Okay,
Jim,
Alan,
him.
Me?
Okay, yes.
Okay, all right.
One thing. Go on.
I think you should, if you want something like that a political party is talking about that you think sounds pretty good, just vote for it. Don't get fooled by you have to boring people saying, oh, it's got to be supply, it's got to be this. If something that appeals to you is your landlord not being able to raise your rent, you should probably vote for that. But if you are someone that is going to benefit from housing going up, feel free to keep doing that as well.
Yeah. So what? No, what's needed is political leadership, true leadership, because as we discussed earlier, most people own a house and want the house prices to go up, but it's bad for society. It's bad for lots of individuals, and it's bad for the way the country works. So this is a situation that happens occasionally when political leaders are faced with a thing that is going to, with a decision or a policy, an idea that's going to be unpopular, but should happen. So how do we achieve that? How do we get, well, I don't know. I don't know. We've had politicians in the past that have done unpopular things that have been necessary. I'm having trouble thinking of them. GST, I guess, is one of them.
Yeah, also you could say the gun buyback.
Yeah, I was thinking of the gun buyback. It's the only one I can think of.
Oh, I think that was popular, wasn't it?
Oh,
Was that popular?
yeah,
Well, it was after Port Arthur. Everyone
was after
kind of
Port Arthur,
against
but-
I don't think it was easy though, because
Yeah.
John Howard.
It was
and the
hard,
No,
is
that's
the
true,
point.
But yeah, I
mean,
think it's fair.
Yeah, look, I think that the one thing that could be done is the creation of a proper organisation. So we have the Australian Housing Supply and Affordability Council, which has been set up as a part of the National Housing Accord, and this council doesn't really have any staff. They use a Treasury Secretariat, and all they do is advise, right? So, I mean, that is a body that could and should have 1,000 people working for it, and their job is to constantly examine, as the Australian Energy Market Operator does, constantly examine the housing market and advise and talk about what supply and demand is and what should happen.
For the average punter, though, it's kind of hard, right? Because it's like, no one's offering that as a policy platform. And then what can they do other than vote, really? It's really hard. It's a hard question to answer, I think.
It's a hard question to answer, but now it's your turn. You've had enough time.
I was hoping you'd forget. I would say, number one, don't vote for a landlord because they're not going to represent your interests if you are a young person or a renter. And yeah, I guess importantly, is this the last question?
This is the last question.
Okay, if that's the last question, then I would also say don't vote for someone who's going to be silent on genocide. Fortunately for everyone, those two are often the same person.
Yes, that's right. Thank you very much to our wonderful panel. Thank you so much for sticking around. Thank you to our wonderful interpreters, Genevieve and Dave. Really appreciate all of your work. And land back, free Palestine. Thanks, everyone.